one weekend I decided I want to go into town to see what the South looked like, because I'm a New York boy. I didn't know what it was like. And we were warned a little bit about the South, but it didn't sink in because I never was associated around segregation. I got on the bus, sat in the front because I wanted to have a nice view of the area. And I noticed the bus driver was squirming in the seat. Finally, he turned around, he said to me, "You, get out of that seat and get in the back with the rest of them." And I looked at him with disbelief. I said, "Who the heck do you think you're talking to?" I used a harsher word. Right. And when I said that, the people on the bus clapped. He drove off. He went 2 more stops, and I started thinking, that's right, these people think differently down here. I got off the bus because I didn't know what was going to happen. That was one incident. I'll tell you another incident.
Did you have your uniform on?
Yes, yes. Sharp as can be, with my little wings up in the top here. I didn't have my wings down here on my commission yet. Yes, I had my uniform on, and I was shocked to get that type of response, but then I started thinking, they did warn us, so I should have been forewarned, and I should have done a little differently, but I wasn't aware of that.
Yes, yes. You said there was another incident that...
Yes. I remember after I graduated from the University of Michigan, I came back, and before I forget, I got in Tuskegee, and I wanted to fly. I did fly, but I met such a great bunch of guys down there who had accomplished things in life already and in the process of accomplishing things, and they gave me the incentive to go on and finish my education. So the minute the war ended, I got out, went to school, graduated from the University of Michigan in 1950, and worked in Detroit for 1 year. During that period, that 1 year period, I went to Detroit Law School thinking I'd like to become a lawyer besides an engineer.
Now, in the engineering school, you got your engineering degree at the University of Michigan.
That's correct.
And what was that degree? What type of engineering?
Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering.
All right.
That was it. And I worked in Detroit as an engineer for an engineering firm for a year. And during that 1 year period, I went to Detroit Law School for 1 semester. To last 1 semester, because in engineering, things are either this way or that way, but in law, it can be this way or that way, and I couldn't get my thinking that way. So when I came back to New York, I went to graduate school at New York University.
And that's where you got your master's?
I got my master's and Bachelor of Science, Master of Science in Civil Engineering.
Wonderful.
That's correct.
Right.
Yes. When I left, and I'm getting to the point how I got to the Port Authority. The Port Authority was a place where they had Irish and Italians, very few blacks, and I don't know what capacity they were in. So I came back, my wife and I drove from Detroit to New York, dropped off our stuff. I didn't have a job now. They tried to entice me to stay in Detroit with this company I was with, a white company. But I said, no, I want to get back to New York.
Now, before that, you mentioned your wife. Now, when did you get married? Because that's important. When did you get married? Because I know she's played a great part in your life for 51 years.
That's
so
right.
When did you get married now in relationship to getting your engineering degree or the Army? Was it after that you got married?
Good question. When I got out of the service, I tried to get into NYU, Columbia, Cooper Union. Everything was filled. They said I have to wait 2 years because all the veterans were returning.
Right.
New York State formed what they call the Associated Colleges of Upper New York. And they had about 3 or 4 different schools. One was in Plattsburgh, one was in Sampson, New York. I picked the one in Plattsburgh. It just so happened that when I got there, I was on campus, and that town was quite a segregated town also. This is 1950. This is 1945, 46. 46. I decided I didn't want to live on campus. I want to live in town. So they said, well, there's a young lady doctor that has an apartment down there with a colored lady. She's about to leave there, and maybe you can speak to her and get her apartment. So I met her. I met her in 1946. She came down the stairs, my first time seeing her. No other color there, so we got a relationship, talking with one another and so forth. She subsequently left Plattsburgh, came to Summit, New Jersey, interned there, and then she went out to South Dakota at the Indian reservation for 2 years, but we kept contact with one another all the time.
I see.
Finally, when I was in my senior year, end of junior year, senior year at Michigan, a war was about to break out in Korea, and she advised me about it. She left South Dakota, came back, and we got married in Detroit. Not Detroit, Chicago.
Oh, okay.
Chicago.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Of course, our parents were a little upset because we eloped, and they knew nothing about it. So we were carrying on there for about 3 years before we got married in 1949, December 19th, 1949.
All right, that's wonderful.
To answer your question.
Okay, fine. Now we can get along with the story.
All right. We took our trip from Detroit to New York, dropped our material off at her parents' home on Macon Street, and I lived on Macon Street in Sayville.
Well, my mother-in-law lives on Macon Street now.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
543 Macon Street.
Macon Street in
Yeah,
Brooklyn.
in Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn, that's
where my
correct.
wife grew up, on Macon Street.
Oh, for goodness sake. Small world.
Small world, yeah.
Small world. I understand you're a Michigan man also.
University of Michigan.
Isn't that
That's
a
also-
coincidence?
yeah, that's right.
So we have some ties there, brother.
That's right, yes.
Anyhow, we dropped our things off at her mother's place, and we decided to take a trip across country. I had a brand new car then. My mother, all the money I sent home to her for an allotment, she saved for me. I didn't even realize that because it was for her use. So we ended up buying a new car. We drove from New York to California to Mexico City home, 12,500 miles over a 2.5-month period,
Right.
because I didn't have a job. And on our trip over, before we got to Reno, Nevada, in Utah, we saw these big signs saying, "Visit Harold's Place." It was a nightclub out there in Reno, Nevada.
Mhm.
We got to Harold's Place. My wife walked in first ahead of me, and before she could pull the handle down on that slot machine, the guy came running over and said, "You folks get out of here and go down the street to the colored place." I couldn't believe what he was saying. We left. We went to the sheriff's office, told him what happened to us, and he said, "Sir, I'm so sorry that happened to you, but that's the law of the land. The law of the land."
This was in Reno?
I said, "The law of the land?" I said, "I'm not spending another cent here in the United States on recreation." From that point on, my wife and I, every year we went to 1 or 2 countries differently. We've gone to 45 different countries. Some of them we've gone to 2 and 3 times because of that situation. However, back in 1980 or so, I had occasion to travel across country a few times. And by the way, at that time, when we went across the country the first time, they had a little green book, and it was called, put out by a colored group, called Rest Without Molest. So you know where to stop at,
Oh,
to
I
stay
see.
on. But
Yes.
all this thing didn't hit me because I wasn't bothered with this type of thing before. Well, anyway, in the 80s, my wife and I, we traveled quite a bit through the United States, and I had occasion to see how wonderful things were in the 80s now, 50s, 60s, 70s, forget it. It was something else. In the 80s, it was much better. So the 80s and 90s, things improved tremendously. From what I've seen here, I can tell the people we have the beautiful country. We have the best country in the world. The best country in the world. But we have to still persevere to get our share of the American way of life. I realize that. When I drove down along the coastline from San Francisco to Los Angeles on Route 1 or 101, I thought I was in New Zealand. It was so beautiful. The only thing missing were the sheep. The only thing missing were the sheep. Well, anyway, that's my 2 stories of segregation. We came back to New York, and they had in the paper, and this is how I got to the Port Authority,